everybody. Welcome to the About That podcast. I'm your host, Chantel Millen, and today's About That is acclimating to elevation. Actually, that's like the name of the series, I guess. It's going to be like 2 or 3 podcasts, we'll see. The one for today, we're actually going to talk about adjusting your community for elevation. So acclimating to elevation is where we're going to get to. Today, we're just going to talk about adjusting your community to elevation. If you're new to the podcast, guess what? Most of us are, because it's a new podcast. It's only our 2nd episode, and so I'm glad that you're here with us. Hopefully, this will be encouraging for you, perhaps confirming for you, affirming for you, or just some direction, perhaps. Just hoping that the Lord would use it in whatever way He sees fit. And I look forward to dialoguing about it, talking about it, and just seeing where we go. So if you will, at some point, an hour later, look up Exodus 19. That's where we're going to come from. Just for definition purposes, when we talk about acclimating to elevation, acclimating is getting accustomed to like a new climate or like a new condition, right? So you're adjusting to it, getting used to it, that sort of thing. And so one of the first steps in acclimating to elevation, and by that I mean the next place that the Lord would have for you to go, if it's in your business, if it's in your relationship with Him, if it is in just you as a person, in your marriage relationships, whatever the case might be, as He's preparing to take you to a new condition, a new environment, preparing to be in that, to receive that, to be able to operate well in that new condition, in that new place. There are actually some steps to take, and the Lord showed that to me through Exodus 19. And so one of the first steps that He talked about or showed me was adjusting your community. As you prepare for this elevation, one of the first things we need to do is take a look at those around us and consider if there is some work to be done in that place, if there is some adjusting to be done in that place. And so as we look at Exodus 19, what we see is that the Israelites are 2 months from being out of Egypt. They have made it to Mount Sinai. They're setting up camp there. And so Moses goes up the mountain. The Lord calls him, gives him some instructions to give to the Israelites. He takes those instructions back down, gives them to the elders. The elders respond and say, we'll do whatever the Lord tells us to do. Great. So Moses takes that message back up the mountain. He says, Lord, they are on board. They're going to do whatever you've commanded. And so the Lord's like, okay. He says, what you need to do is go back down the mountain and prepare your people for my arrival. He says, I'm going to come in a thick cloud and I'm going to speak to you, but they're going to be able to see me. And I'm doing that on purpose because as they see me talking to you, they will then trust you, right? Because they see you talking to me. That right there is probably a word in itself, right? If we would show evidence of the fact that we are conversing with the Lord, people would be more likely to trust us, right? And perhaps if we are not being trusted, it could be that our life is not showing evidence that we are in conversation and relationship with Him. You can take that and do what you will. Nevertheless, let me get back. So he says that to Moses, and so as he tells him that, he says, go down, get your people prepared. Verse 12 is where we're going to go. One of the first steps in adjusting your community comes from verse 12. Verse 12 says, mark off a boundary all around the mountain and warn the people, be careful, do not go up on the mountain or even touch its boundaries. Anyone who touches the mountain will certainly be put to death. Now, here's the thing. What I see in verse 12 is this. The Lord did not come down and set the boundary Himself, right? He didn't come down and like throw some river around the mountain or make some way for them so that they wouldn't cross the boundary. No, he told Moses, you go down, you set the boundary, and then let the people know if they cross the boundary, it's going to be deadly for them. If they cross it, if they touch the mountain, it's going to be deadly for them. What that says to me is, as I'm adjusting my community, one of the first things I need to do is I need to set my boundaries. Me. Not, Lord, I need you. No, I need to set my boundaries, right? I'm no longer going to go here. I'm no longer going to participate in negative conversation that's not uplifting to my brother and my sister. I'm no longer going to do this or do that. I'm no longer going to accept this behavior or this sort of conversation. Whatever your boundaries are or need to be, the responsibility is on us to set them. Us, right? Not on the Lord, but on us. Also in verse 12, we see that the reason the boundary is set, or what the boundary tells me, is that everybody's not going to be able to go up the mountain. If they could, there would have been no need to set a boundary, right? But by setting the boundary, by telling them don't cross it, don't touch the mountain, you're going to die, tells me that everybody wasn't meant to go up the mountain. Hence why I say everybody can't go. All right. Now, the next thing I see is that in verse 12, in verse 21, and in verse 24, the Lord gives the same warning. And he says, tell your people, don't touch the boundary, don't cross the boundary, don't touch the mountain, or it will be the end for them. Now, I was taught growing up, if the Lord repeats himself, that's something you need to pay attention to, right? And so because he has said that in 3 separate verses, the Lord knew, he knew us well enough to know that some of us was going to try it. Like, tell me one time, I might hear you. Like, I think about my 4-year-old. Like, I say it the first time, it's almost like it's a suggestion. The second time is like, I don't know, a stronger suggestion. And it's like the third time when he's like, oh, like mama's for real. Okay, let me do what she said. Like, the Lord knew, right? That it was going to take a few warnings, a few reminders. Like, make sure you tell them, don't touch it, don't cross it, don't do it. It's going to be a problem, right? And so what that says to me in adjusting my community is that I need to be clear and consistent with my boundaries. Clear and consistent. A lot of times we set boundaries, but we don't tell people. Like, we just expect them to know that I have set this boundary. And so when they cross it, we are upset. And they may not know why. And it's because we have set this boundary that we have not made people aware of. People that we know are likely to cross the boundary, which is why we are setting the boundary in the first place, right? So we have to let people know. Like, how do you go and play basketball on a court if it was like an endless court and had no, it had no lines, no edges, no nothing? You wouldn't know, like, where's out of bounds, where's inbounds. Like, I need to know where my boundaries are, right? The same, we have to set our boundaries, and they have to be clear and they have to be consistent. And so when someone attempts to cross that boundary after it's been made clear, we have to consistently say, wait, nope, not gonna do that. Wait, nope, not gonna do that. Wait, nope. Like, again, I think about my 4-year-old. Like, if I want to set in process a disciplinary action for him, I have to be consistent in doing that before he realizes, oh, okay, this really is a thing, right? If I just do it once, he's going to shrug it off and like go about his business. So we have to be consistent. We have to be clear in our boundaries. Then we get to verse 24. And this is actually the last thing in the adjusting of community. What we see is that in verse 24, the Lord actually tells Moses that he can bring Aaron. which is actually really comforting news. And I'll tell you why. Because what that means is that as the Lord is elevating me, as the conditions of my life are changing, I can trust the Lord. I can ask the Lord to not allow that to be a place that I'm in by myself, right? But that can be a place where someone can join me, and I can continue to have relationships and do life with people who are on that same journey, are experiencing that same elevation, or experiencing that same condition. And that's a beautiful thing, because there's still people you can relate to and have conversation with, that can understand where you are and where you're headed. And so that's beautiful. The other part we see is that he says, you can bring Aaron up with you. But then he says, but tell the priest and the other people, don't touch the mountain. And when I read it at first, I was like, dang, like the priest can't go. And then what I realized was it doesn't matter rank, position, title, gifting, money, status, whatever. None of that is a qualifier for going with you to your elevated place. So the people that you assume should be going may not be the people that God has ordained to go. Which means we have to be in a place of prayer, in a place of discernment with him, to say, Lord, who is it that is going with me, and who is it that's not going with me? Now, we can talk about reason, season, and lifetime people and friendships another day. I do believe in that very much so, but we can talk about it another day. But again, this shows me that who the Lord would have for you to go is who he's chosen. And again, it's not predicated on the things that you might think, right? It doesn't speak to their holiness. It doesn't speak to their righteousness. It doesn't speak to their relationship with the Lord. None of that. So don't hear what I'm not saying, right? I'm not saying that just because they can't go means that they must be living a life of sin. I'm not saying that at all. All I'm saying is the Lord knows your journey, and he knows the people with whom he has called and ordained to go to that next place of elevation with you. And that decision is not predicated on any of the things that perhaps the world would predicate it on. And so again, it requires us to be in a place of prayer with him. So as you're adjusting your community, you have to set your boundaries. You have to set them. You have to know that everybody can't go. You need to be clear and consistent with your boundary. And you need to be in a place of prayer with the Lord to know who is it that should be coming with me and who is it that perhaps should not be. So feel free to comment. Feel free to rebuttal if you want. That's okay. We all have opinions and thoughts, and I want to hear all the things. So comment, like, subscribe, all the podcast things. But most of all, I want a dialogue. I want to hear if perhaps this is confirming for you, if you have questions, if you disagree, agree, etc. Feel free to let me know. The next podcast we will talk about, or the next episode, we will talk about the actual process of acclimating to elevation, which is actually really awesome, because the Lord likened it to something that is familiar, or perhaps something that we can kind of see with our own eyes and consider in our own actually earthly experience. And so I think it's going to be great. Anywho, that is that for this episode. I look forward to hearing from you. And until I see you next time, this is About That, and that's a wrap. Have a good day.